Good afternoon. I hope you had fun with the Section 6 or Unit 6 number 2 assignment where you were supposed to go to a mall or a food center or somewhere and observe the behavior of families at their best and sometimes at their worst. And notice the types of things that are showing up in those interactions in terms of the terminology and the basics of the philosophies that you're learning in that section. Today I'd like to move on to Unit 6, Assignment 3, which has to do more with the Code of Ethics and legal guidelines for family therapists. And I want to point out two books that are really very important to you. And the first is that you should get your hands on is the User's Guide to the AAMFT Code of Ethics, and this is published out of Washington, D.C. Very important for you to have, particularly not only for your written exam, but also for your state oral or province oral exams. The first two chapters, I want to highlight a little bit about each chapter and some thoughts about them. There's a lot about a therapist's responsibility to clients. So when you, for instance, examples might be when you're calling them on the phone because they've called you for an appointment. What can you ask them? What can you not ask them? What kinds of information do you need to get regarding other members in the family, and do you have the legal consent to do that? Things like that are very important. Also, what do you give clients in those first sessions? What do you ask them to fill out? Which documents are important? And I would remind you that certainly a piece of those documents are the HIPAA documents that you must have clients read over and sign and agree to. The second or the third chapter actually in this booklet is called Confidentiality. Huge issue right now in all of counseling, therapy, psychology, whatever you might call it at this point in time. Particularly of importance are children not of legal age yet, and what legal age is, and I want you to learn about that in the question today. But I want you to remember that just because a parent brings a child in for counseling does not mean that you have the consent of the other parent. So you need to check with both parents to make sure that you have, I would suggest, the documents on file as well as their permission, either both verbally or in writing. The next one comes under professional competence and integrity. And this comes down to the types of things when sometimes you may be dealing with a client you don't feel comfortable with. And my best information here that I've always been taught is seek out supervision from others who have good information in this field and can help teach you and help you learn to handle these situations better. Simply choosing to opt out of working with someone is not always the best answer, because it's not always the best answer in terms of your own learning and your own opening to other situations. Again, in Chapter 5, they cover the competence and integrity. And a good reminder here is to remember to keep taking your CEUs in areas where you need that competence that you don't feel so comfortable about. Next, Chapter 6 talks about responsibility to students and supervisees. So if you're a supervisor, if you're a teacher, it talks very much about our responsibilities to you. In Chapter 7, we talk about how to handle research participants. A big thing that happens here is sometimes that people forget that you need the permission of a board within your university concerning research participants, and you need the permission of each participant in your study for certain types of studies that you undertake. Chapter 8 is responsibility to the profession. What types of organizations you should belong to, what types of things you should report as a clinician, what types of things, what ways you can be involved with your professional organizations, and so on. Chapter 9 has to do with financial arrangements, which comes up many times when you're working with situations where you either have a sliding scale, where you have a set scale, or whether you choose to work with a percentage of assets. And these are things that I know that you deal a lot with in your other classes as it relates to the ethics and so on. And Chapter 10 has a lot to do with advertising. And I would say that probably 50% of the advertising that I see by clinicians is often inaccurate. So if you think you're not going to be asked questions in your oral exam about these areas and also in your written exam, think again, because you probably will. Second book I highly recommend is Legal Guidelines for Family Therapists with Selected Clinical or Ethical Opinions, again by AAMFT out of Washington, D.C. And again, primarily 3 sections where they give examples of some of the things that I've just talked about. The first is the therapist in the office, handling things like forms, keeping clinical records, the HIPAA notice and privacy practices, record retention and destruction, withholding records from the client who doesn't pay, and complaints. The second session has to do with the therapist and the client. Again, the informed consent document, confidentiality, duty to warn, duty to report, mandated reporter issues, treating children, whether you're going to use the no secrets philosophy or not in your therapy with a family, confidentially in a court-ordered setting, testifying, termination of treatment, and client suicide. These are very good examples in this book of how to handle many of these situations. And the last section is the therapist in the court, which has to do with subpoenas, understanding privilege, treating the therapist as a witness, clients involved in custody disputes, which you're going to run into, and psychotherapy notes. So I really encourage you again to get these 2 books. They aren't expensive, and they will remain on your shelf for a long time until they are rewritten again with any changes to the ethics or standards of marriage and family therapy. I hope you have fun with the assignment this week, and I look forward to reading them.